Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran and this is episode 56 of season 2. Coming up in this episode, I look at all the events in the years that led up to Kempe Gowda I building the Pete and the fort to protect it. Now, I think that understanding the entire history and the ecosystem that led up to the building of the city will only help us understand Bengaluru better. And that means a deeper dive into the events of the Vijayanagara kingdom, and that will be the theme of this episode. But before I dive into anything, a word of thanks to my sponsors, the Prestige Group, whose corporate support makes this podcast possible. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. The 16th century was a defining century for Bengaluru. The one thing that stands out for the history of the city is the beginning of the modern urban city as we know it. But the more significant thing is the change of guard in the region, politically and culturally, and the events in Vijayanagara, which went from moments of complete despair to the setting up of a new glory under Krishnadeva Raya. And it was during the time of Krishnadeva Raya's successor Asha Thadani that Kempe Gowda got permission to build the fort to guard the Pete. And at the same time, what the Bahmani Sultanate and its 5 successor states were up to, and the peculiar relationship that existed between Vijayanagara and the Sultanates. But it was the end of Vijayanagara following the Battle of Talikota that gave Kempe Gowda the freedom and independence and the Mysore Wadiyars dominion over the south. So over the next few episodes, I am going to unpack all that history in parts. And this episode starts at the beginning of that tumultuous period. The arrival of the Sultanates from Delhi and then the local ones started to change something essentially cultural in the south. If you pedal back to the Kadambas in the 4th century, history since then recorded a succession of homegrown South Indian dynasties that were the major players south of the Vindhya and the Narmada. The south had always featured the majors, Kannada and Tamil power centers, with the Telugu nations playing a significant political role and the Kerala country an important supporting mercantile role. The other South Indian languages remained important in their provincial domains. The defining flavor of these dynasties was that they were homegrown, identifiably South Indian players. After the Vijayanagara kingdom, and from then on pretty much through to the present day, the politics of the region became more cosmopolitan in terms of the interests that ruled the region. The splintering of the Deccan started before the Vijayanagara Empire was established. The first taste of this, regular listeners of this podcast will remember from earlier episodes, was towards the end of the Hoysala dynasty. Let's look at that for a minute. Faced with the first of the external threats from the Delhi Sultanate, it was Virupaksha III who tried to bring the kings and the leaders of the south together in a coalition. And to achieve this, he even devolved day-to-day administration to his council of ministers. Things must have looked pretty bleak to Virupaksha III. He tried, but soon unable to foster any meaningful unity among the South Indian leaders, he went ahead and waged war against the Sultan at Madurai, who was a breakaway from the Delhi Sultanate. Virupaksha almost won that battle, but there was a sudden and unfortunate twist in the tale, and he was killed and by legend hung from the walls of Madurai for the public to see. I captured the story in an earlier episode about the death of Virupaksha III, titled, "They Killed Him and Hung His Body in Public." Do listen. It gives you context for what I'm saying about the breakdown of the days of southern glory. After the Hoysala kingdom had fallen and when the Vijayanagara kings picked up the reins, the south had fallen to them pretty much by default. There were really no large kingdoms with whom they had to jockey for power. By this I mean other homebrew dynasties. The great centuries-long Pallava, Vatapi Chalukya conflicts come to mind. Although the successive dynasties that ruled from Vijayanagara were adept at administration, the Sangama and the Saluva dynasties notably suffered with internal squabbles that involved twisted, murderous plots. One of these targeted Devaraya II, who was one of the great leaders of Vijayanagara. According to the contemporary account of Abdur Razak, an unnamed assailant, identified circumstantially as a royal, a prince, decided to take the throne. One night, this prince had just completed a grand new residence, so to mark the occasion, he invited the king, Devaraya II, and all the leading figures of the empire to a banquet. Now, the guests, by convention, did not dine all together. Instead, they were seated in a large hall and summoned one by one to eat in private. Meanwhile, the prince had arranged for every kind of musical instruments, drums, kettle drums, trumpets, and flutes to play simultaneously, creating a deafening din, a cacophony across the house. This is highly plausible. We endure such cacophony that happens in our public celebrations to this day. But the point then was that the noise masked what was actually going to take place. Each time a guest entered the inner room, two assassins hiding in the room sprang out, stabbed him with a dagger, and dismembered his body. Once the remains were cleared, the next guest was summoned. One after another, the nobles of the empire walked into their deaths, unaware of the fate that awaited them. The music ensured that no cries of help were heard, and by the end of the evening, the entire political and administrative leadership had been decimated. With his house soaked in blood, the prince then made his way to Devaraya's palace, the main palace. He approached the royal guards, spoke to them very nicely, and invited them all to join the feast. The palace was now pretty much undefended. The prince made his way into the palace, entered the king's presence, and held out a dish of betel nuts, beneath which he had concealed a dagger. He told the king that all was ready, and the only thing was that his presence was awaited. But Devaraya, sensing danger, maybe he was not feeling it that evening, replied, "I'm not coming. I'm not in good health today." Foiled in his plan to lure Devaraya into a trap in his new house, the prince drew his weapon and struck the king several times. Devaraya lost his balance and fell behind his throne. Now, believing the king to be dead, the assassin left a henchman to finish the job, to cut off Devaraya's head. The prince then went to the portico of the main palace and proclaimed to the assembled people, "I have slain the king, his brothers," and then provided a list of all the emirs, the Brahmins and the viziers. "Now I am king." Back inside the palace, though, Devaraya was not dead. Struck by the heavy blows, he had collapsed unconscious, but he was not dead. As the prince's henchman approached to finish the job of decapitating him, Devaraya picked up a chair and struck him hard in the chest with so much force that the assailant was thrown to the ground. A palace guard who was hiding in the shadows came to his assistance and killed the henchman. And then, together, the palace guard and Devaraya rushed out of the room into an adjoining suite and escaped through the harem. Meanwhile, the traitorous brother was addressing the crowd from the palace steps, waiting to be recognized as king and take the throne. At that very moment, Devaraya's voice rang out, "I am alive, I am well, seize that wretch." The crowd turned on the prince and killed him on the spot. What a story! But the question that has exercised historians is this: who was this murderous prince? And the answer to that question probably lies in an inscription found in Shravanabelagola dating back to May 1446 that speaks of the death of a Pratapa Devaraya. It reads with some anguish, "In the evil year Kashaya, in the wretched month 2nd Vaishaka, on a miserable Tuesday, in a fortnight which was the reverse of bright, on the 14th day, the unequal store of valor Pratapa Devaraya, alas, met with death." Was Pratapa Devaraya the individual who tried to kill Devaraya II, his brother? Very likely. For one thing, the relative ease with which he was able to make the claim to the throne on the presumed death of Devaraya would suggest that he had been a royal and a royal in line for the throne. there was only one person that fit that description, and that was Devaraya Raya. Also because of another inscription that was found in Satyamangalam in Vellore. In a preamble written to this inscription that was made public in the early 1900s in Epigraphia Indica, historian and epigraphist Eugen Hulsch lays out a Sangama dynasty genealogy where he mentions Devaraya as Devaraya's brother. And the inscription itself records Devaraya's death, confirming the one in Shravanabelagola. But this one was written many years later, in 1528, and was written without the anguish of the more contemporary source that I cited earlier. This one simply reads, "His glory was made resplendent by his renowned younger brother, Devaraya." So his glory was Devaraya II's glory, and how it was made resplendent by his younger brother was up to interpretation, I guess. So all this lined up. There has been some consensus that this astonishing mass murder palace coup could well have been perpetrated by Raya. Now, if Raya died in 1444, the estimates by some historians that Devaraya ruled till 1449 is probably correct. And although it was by some sixth sense on the part of Devaraya to refuse to eat dinner and fake an illness that the Sangama dynasty even continued with him, but it was short-lived. It is also said that the poison from the dagger that struck Devaraya eventually killed him, and this was not very long after this assassination attempt. And now it's time for a commercial break. When I come back, I will continue with setting up the ambience in the Deccan and events that must have had a direct impact on the history of Mysore and Yelahanka. Right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. Radar approved.
I'm back, and to continue with the story. All the Vijayanagara dynasties were rich and they were powerful. Hampi was always the shining city on the hill, but the power and the grandeur that a layperson commonly associates with the Vijayanagara Empire started to hit its peak around the time of the Tuluva dynasty kings, in particular the reign of Krishnadeva Raya. To lay history where it's due, the Tuluva dynasty reaped the glory of the empire from the efforts of the general and, in a way, the founder of the line, Saluva Narasimha. After the death of Devaraya II in 1449, a watershed moment for the empire, it marked the start of the empire's decline. After Devaraya died, the line of succession is a little hard to determine because the period after the reign of Devaraya II is one of the most obscure in the history of the empire. Robert Sewell, one of the first modern historians of Vijayanagara, in his frustration, called this lack of information as being in primeval darkness because sources were scarce and what survives offers very little clarity. When you walk today among the UNESCO-protected ruins at Hampi, it is easy to lose oneself in the glory that was once Vijayanagara and not think about the succession of kings during this period after Devaraya II that reads like a parade of incompetent, depraved, butcherous ruffians, a period of dynastic confusion and violent, senseless ambition. Devaraya's younger brother, Vijaya II, also known as Devaraya III, appears to have taken the throne, but his reign was brief and it was uncertain. After his death, a power struggle broke out between the two rival claimants, Virupaksha II, his own son, and Mallikarjuna, who was the son of Devaraya II. It is possible that Virupaksha took the throne first, but if he did, it was only for a moment. Mallikarjuna overpowered him and ruled for nearly 2 decades. It was not a great time for the country as Mallikarjuna was corrupt and unreliable. When Mallikarjuna died around 1465, the throne then may have passed on briefly to his son Rajashekara, But that was for less than a year, because Virupaksha II returned, and this time he came with force. He stormed the capital, killed Rajashekara, eliminated all the other rivals, and installed himself as emperor. But again, Virupaksha II was a hedonist. He spent more time out of sight in his harem than he did administering the kingdom. Heavy-handed, he was despotic, cruel, and given entirely to indulgence, self-indulgence, concerned with little beyond women and drunken rages. Paranoid to the extreme, he once killed a commander in the army merely because he had had a dream the previous night that soldier had tried to assassinate him. Virupaksha II's excesses stirred widespread resentment in the kingdom, and soon the entire country rose in rebellion. Around 1485, Virupaksha was murdered by a son whose name no one seems to know, but it seemed it was the older son, because the younger son was called Prauda Devaraya or Praudaraya. By having killed his father, the older son would have got the throne, but stricken with remorse about his patricide and feeling too guilty to work, he said, "Although this kingdom may be mine by right, I do not want it, because I killed my father and did therein that which I ought not to have done, and have committed a moral sin, and for that reason it is not well that such an unworthy son should inherit the kingdom. Take my brother and let him govern, since he did not stain his hands with his father's blood." And so Praudaraya was crowned king. But gratitude to his older brother Aveni was quickly dispelled by his palace advisors, who told him that if his brother could kill his father, he could one day kill him too. Suitably spooked, Prauda killed his older brother before he could change his mind about the throne. This sort of mayhem followed practically every king in the entire succession after Devaraya II. They were murdered and their allies were purged. Honestly, I spent over a day trying to make sense of who murdered whom and how they were related, but it was no use. This pageant of peril was so mixed up that the confusion even seems to have crippled the syntax of British historians like Sewell and Bess. Sewell acknowledged considerable difficulty with the illogical nature of available evidence. Even historian Burton Stein, the author of one of the best Vijayanagara history books, saw the virtue in reducing the final years of the Sangama dynasty to a single paragraph, and I quote, "The major cause of Vijayanagara decline was dissension among claimants to the throne and their machinations, which finally induced Saluva Narasimha, the military savior of the dynasty in its last years, to seize power. He was to be a bridge into a new political phase of Vijayanagara history." By now, the nobility of the kingdom had had enough. Disillusioned with the royal line of the Sangamas, they overthrew the last kings and installed one of their own, Narasimha Saluva, on the throne. And this was sometime after 1485. But it was the end of the Sangama line and the start of the Saluva dynasty under this powerful general. The consequence of Virupaksha's hedonistic excesses had resulted in a significant loss of territory and an increased vulnerability of the kingdom. Important territories like Goa and Dabol were lost to the Sultanate. Meanwhile, taking advantage of all this confusion, the Gajapatis of Odisha acted up. Their previous efforts to drive Vijayanagara out of the Andhra territories had failed under Devaraya II. So when he died, they saw their opportunity and launched a major offensive. In all the confusion of the murderous musical chairs in the palace and the collapse of the royal chain of command, it was a good thing for the empire that the reins of administration had passed on from the last of the Sangamas to Saluva Narasimha, and this was done to great rejoicing. The timeline of this rather inglorious period of Vijayanagara's history started with the death of Devaraya II, which was any time around 1448 by best available sources, to the usurpation of Saluva Narasimha. And it's called a usurpation because he took the throne via a palace coup, and that was probably in early 1486. Around the same time that Vijayanagara was having its internal troubles, the situation in the Bahmani kingdom was not much better. A succession of incompetence had affected that kingdom too, and power was slipping away from them, and the Bahmani kingdom slid rapidly towards its breakup into 5 independent sultanates. And these were Bijapur, ruled by the Adil Shahi dynasty; Golconda, ruled by the Qutub Shahi dynasty; Ahmednagar, ruled by the Nizam Shahi dynasty; Bidar, ruled by the Barid Shahi dynasty; and Berar, ruled by the Imad Shahi dynasty. Of these, Ahmednagar and Bijapur were the first to break away or become autonomous in 1490. All the others followed until 1518, when the Bahmani kingdom ended. And of these, our primary concern would be the Bijapur Sultanate, the Adil Shahs, as they would one day sack Hampi, causing the destruction of both the city and the empire. And during those 40 years of great instability in Vijayanagara and Bahmani, Mysore and Yelahanka experienced the opposite, a great stability during the period, principally because each only had one ruler during the entire time. Mysore was ruled by Chamaraja II, and Yelahanka by Kempe Gowda, the father of Kempe Gowda, who was the founder of Bengaluru. Now, all that said, Saluva Narasimha was a strong hand at the helm, and he did manage to steady that wayward ship. And by doing this, he set the stage for the next glorious period of the Vijayanagara kingdom under its most charismatic ever king, Krishnadeva Raya. In the next episode, I will continue with the story of Krishnadeva Raya, who took the Vijayanagara throne in 1509, and his contemporary and vassal Kempe Gowda, who took the Yelahanka chieftainship in 1513. Stay tuned for all those exciting stories that are coming right up. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.